the Regenerative Finance Aligned Voter Committee subcommittee meeting of MakerDAO. And in case you couldn't tell, I'm especially excited for today, and I hope it came through in the meeting announcement, that we are going to hear from someone who's been very, very, very close to all things Endgame and all the things that we hold near and dear as governance actors. And I won't steal any of his thunder in terms of getting into that, but just a few words of introduction about today's call. I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, today is the support scope, and Jetstream is working on accessibility scope. And what's going on with that? Well, I will say two things about that. One is a confession that, I got mixed up, but it was actually one of those mistakes where your subconscious knows better than you what you ought to be doing. Because here's how I realized all of this really hangs together, which is also probably why I jumped at the idea when I was looking over the forum and reading about the launch of Jetstream and the offboarding of ducks. Having support scope in mind, I've thought about the location rules for the front ends, and the two just kind of conflated in my mind. And at the end of the day, though, what I think I'd like all of the delegates who are following ReFi to be thinking about, and just a footnote, Space Exponential is going to take over the last 15 minutes of the meeting and do some housekeeping and go over some of the things that you all have prepared for this meeting, which was fantastic, by the way. Thank you very much, delegates who submitted the new work product. But as I was thinking about particularly the legal issues, many of you know that I'm an attorney in my day job and think a lot about this kind of thing. And, we had some things happen over the past several days that got a lot of attention, which we're not going to cover. But as we're still concerned about the advisory council, right? We still really need the scope improvement articles improved. And today's conversation is going to get us to the heart of some technical issues that, we're excited at ReFi to cover the hard stuff, to cover the hardcore coding stuff that, certainly is something that's difficult for me as a non-technical person. But if we're going to be thinking about advisors, particularly legal advisors, it's helpful to understand the things that they will be advising us on. And I believe that when we hear from Dennis about decentralization and composability, a lot of these product decisions are very much linked to the regulatory analysis or, the compliance obligations that sub-DAOs will be thinking about. And so as we get into the conversation, that's a way, and again, Caroline will probably cover some other thoughts toward the end of the call, a way that this conversation about the accessibility scope really is designed to help inform our approach to the support scope. Particularly, from my perspective, I think the way the legal research is being conducted and making sure that that's very integrated with a knowledge and understanding of, what exactly Endgame is. So with that, I would love to hand over the mic to Dennis to introduce yourself, and congratulations on Jetstream and transitioning over and your work on the launch project and terrific presentation in Seoul. I watched that, and so just really grateful that you've taken your time to speak with us. We're so excited.
Thanks, Kianga. That's super kind of you. Also, just thanks for inviting me, because frankly, if you're immersed in execution, right? It's hard to stay in touch with what's going on at the governance side of things. So I was really curious to see how these calls are being ran and like what the vibe is. But also thanks for the intro. I'll definitely talk a lot about front ends, but I think the nice thing about it is that we'll eventually start talking about the underlying principles of Endgame, and that's, I think, not limited to one particular domain or one scope. And I think we can find a way to make this eventually relevant to the support scope. So I've been thinking a little bit about how I want to approach it. I'll start with sketching some context. So first I'll give a quick intro and talk about what I'm doing with my team. And I'll talk a little bit about Endgame and where we are with things currently. And then we'll talk a little bit about, as you mentioned, like what the effect of Endgame is on things like front ends and let's say the legal matters, and how that can be, how the support scope could be of help there. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dennis. I've been with Maker for about 2 years now. Before that time, I was working as basically a product manager in DeFi and blockchain. I started out as a product manager at the development and UX core unit, also known as DUX. And then a few months later, I also took the facilitator role. And it's been a crazy ride for us. Like initially, it was smooth sailing. We had a very clear mandate. We were building the governance portal and related infrastructure and just making that better. But then Endgame started to happen, and it wasn't like this binary switch. There was actually like about a year of, let's say, a lot of confusion and a lot of questions. So as a core unit, it was definitely a struggle to keep up with that and also to position ourselves, right? But end result is very positive. Like we found a way to add value and stay relevant, and that's reflected in the ecosystem actor. So we basically we formally unwinded the DUX core unit. Most of us are sticking around at Maker, and we're doing an ecosystem actor. We're called Jetstream. We announced the ecosystem actor a few weeks ago, and we're basically building software components that can be used for front ends and data infrastructure under the Maker ecosystem. And we felt like that is a relevant thing to do because Endgame is quite a big change, not only in terms of the organizational setup, right? The fact that we have these AVC meetings, that's one of the outcomes, right, of Endgame. But there's actually a lot of like protocol work that's being done as well. A lot of new components, a lot of new concepts, which also requires a lot of new front end work. And as seen in the Atlas, right, in Rune's, let's say, visionary documents, you can tell that the front ends play a very important part. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And what's interesting about Endgame is that decentralization and resilience are very important underlying principles of the whole strategy, right? And that also applies to front ends and data infrastructure. So in the current situation, we have something like MakerDAO.com, right? And there's the governance portal, and there's all these like official MakerDAO applications, and they're actually maintained by Maker Core. They're let's say owned and deployed and hosted by Maker Core. And you could argue that it's not a very resilient approach, right? Because a lot of these, let's say websites are hosted on Web 2 infrastructure. Most of them are using the same accounts, right? And it's all not very resilient. So even though the Maker protocol is like, it's on-chain, it's unstoppable, so to say, it's uncensorable, it's, in that sense, it's really permissionless. And that's what really, I think, most of us brings to this to this project. But then if we consider that the ways to interact with the protocol, right, and the way to consume information about the protocol, they're all not that resilient at all. So that's one of the things that Endgame is trying to solve for. And a way to do that is to have more stringent requirements for these front ends to make sure that they can't just use AWS and like centrable data infrastructure, but that they're really optimized for resilience and that they can be available, and there can be like multiple instances of it being available. So whatever happens, there's always going to be a working front end. But another way to achieve this, and that's what Endgame is trying to do, is to diversify or fragment the ways that people interact with the main protocol, right? So the vision is that eventually sub-DAOs will all have their own front end that, of course, will be bespoke to their specific product and their specific brand. But they will always offer certain critical functionalities related to the core protocol. And this is actually going to be required and regulated by MakerCore, so that there's going to be multiple engineering teams with like various entities all over the world in various jurisdictions, offering their own front ends that will offer access to these smart contracts, so that there's no more, let's say, MakerCore official front ends. So looping that back to Jetstream, we are never going to host and operate our own front ends, because that doesn't really fit with the with Endgame. Rather, we're building components, so things like a React hooks library for like let's say plug and play interactions with the protocol and logic that other people can use in the front ends. We're doing a UI components library that people can freely use. We're also doing something else. That's just going to make it very easy to basically use that and build and configure front ends for other teams to host it, right? So we foresee sub-DAO teams using our code, but it could also be ecosystem actors. Alongside that, I should say that right now, Endgame is still in a very early phase, right? In the sense that it's all still being built. The first, let's say, phases are looking really good in terms of execution, but there's still a lot of questions, and there's still the matter of having short-term solutions in place and having a vision for the long term. So that's also where we're trying to contribute, right? We're really trying to figure out how all of this should work, both in the short term and in the long term. And it's just really exciting. We're really grateful to still be part of the community. And it feels like a very relevant and an important thing to work on. I also realized that it's especially for governance participants, it's very hard to get a sense of what's happening in the DAO currently, because I would say it definitely feels more like a startup, right? Where there's like there's like a lot of work being done across various teams, and there's a lot of coordination and communication, but it's not as, let's say, well documented and orderly structured as we were used to, right, with the MIPS. So in that sense, for me, but also I'm sure other ecosystem actors are happy to collaborate with you and create more clarity on what's happening, and also let's say commit to transparency, right? Similar to under the core unit model. So as an ecosystem actor, we plan to not change anything there in terms of like financial reporting and like progress reporting. The only thing is that we need to figure out how to deal with the confidentiality issues, right? There's a lot of work that's being done that's very sensitive. Like, we can't communicate about it because it would basically mess with the goals of Endgame. So it's, in that sense, it's more of a trust base, but of course, happy to answer any questions. There was actually one delegate, I think he was called True. They shared with us an elaborate form for me to fill out, so that they have more more details about our ecosystem actor. They'll do this with other ecosystem actors as well, and they'll be sharing that with all of the governance participants. So I'm glad to see that kind of stuff happening. I'll probably pause here for questions and comments, and then we can maybe talk about the support scope and also my vision on how they can be helpful to the ecosystem. See a few people typing, so that's good. Okay, as we're waiting for those questions. Okay, here we are. I'm going to read it out loud. Called out the inaccessibility regarding governance participation and suggested the DAO toolkit may be crucial here. Can you say more about how you see the DAO toolkit interacting with front ends, if you're knowledgeable here? Yeah, so the truth is that this is all being figured out right now. There's a lot of grounds to be covered by these front ends in terms of functionality and data and user types. So right now we're still in a process where the various teams that are involved in Endgame, they're figuring out like how to coordinate which front end should cover what data infrastructure should be used, and how should they be interacting with one another. So yeah, the honest question is that it's still to be determined. When it comes to the DAO toolkit, that's something that Powerhouse is working on. That's another ecosystem actor. They are a subset of the SES ecosystem, or the SES core unit, and they're building this operations platform that will be very crucial to Maker in endgame state, right? And that will actually be a lot of the front end components that will be used by governance participants, right? So delegates, AVC members. So in that sense, will be really it could be really interesting for you all to invite someone from Powerhouse to share some more about their work. I'm moving on to the next question. In the Jetstream Eat Soul presentation, Adam spoke about pinning services so that the front ends will run when a node is down. And if I understood correctly, the pinning service will be ENS or perhaps the graph. Does this mean end users should run their own node as opposed to dependency of another service? So the answer to that question is that we, Jetstream, we're building to account for all scenarios, right? And that's, I think, what we will end up seeing in Maker. There's going to be a variety of teams building and operating their own front ends, and these entities will be very different. Some of them will be situated in the US, so they will be under US jurisdiction. They will be hosting a front end as we're familiar, right? So it will be like some Web 2 deployment, easy to use, it's super fast, it works well, but it's not as resilient, right? It's probably going to have things like, IP address scanning and like sanctions address scanning. It basically needs to be compliant. But then there's also going to be sub-DAO teams that will have their entity in another jurisdiction, or maybe there's going to be sub-DAO teams or ecosystem actors that don't have an entity at all. They're just anonymous in a way. So I think in the medium to long term, we'll see that there are various front ends in the ecosystem that will overlap in terms of functionality, and they will be offered in various ways. So whatever your, let's say, jurisdiction is, whatever your situation is, there will be a way to use a front end. And so to answer the question, so there will be a specification for front ends that anyone can deploy. That's one aspect to it, right? It's basically the vision is that front ends should be very easy to fork and run yourself. It should be very easy to run in various ways. So that's my hope, right? For Maker front ends is that in the long term we'll have a whole range of front ends. Some of them hosted on IPFS, some of them hosted on some kind of Web 2 infrastructure, but there's just going to be various ways to interact with the core protocol, also during emergencies, right? And then I'm also talking about governance features. I'm talking about accessing data related to the sub-DAOs. Yeah, and that's, I think, really crucial about Endgame, right? We're basically abstracting away Maker Core through the sub-DAOs. Sub-DAOs are going to be the main way in which people will interact with the protocol. I'm moving on to another question. Can you tell us about the qualifications needed to become an ecosystem actor? And is there a roadmap, step-by-step guide, or a plan available for applying to become an ecosystem actor? Yeah, I can share a little bit of context there. I think the term ecosystem actor is actually very generic. You could say that technically any individual, any team, or any business that performs some kind of work or delivers some kind of service in the Maker ecosystem is an ecosystem actor. So it's just like some kind of contractor for the DAO. So in that sense, it's very easy to become an ecosystem actor. There's also this thing that's called incubating ecosystem actors. And that's more of a temporary measure for former core units that want to transition into this new role. That's a bit more. That's a bit more difficult to explain how that works. But it's basically there's a team that has an important mandate to fulfill, and they are incubated by a scope to fulfill that work and to gradually transition into more of a contractor role where their budget is coming from project work as opposed to like a team budget. So if you're looking to become an ecosystem actor, and if you're looking to like contribute to Maker, I would just refer you to the forum and just look at other ecosystem actors and how they got onboarded, and just find a way to make yourself useful to one of the scopes. I'll move on to the question from Kianga. Will the easy governance front-end user tooling? Yeah, absolutely. So in that sense, Jetstream is also tasked with building some reference implementations, including the easy governance front-end, and will definitely use those open source components that I mentioned earlier. Looking at the next question. Yeah, that's right, Navigator. So looking at the next question, being that aligned delegates need to remain anonymous, how are you thinking about sharing offline metadata on the EGF that might expose ADs? Yeah, I can be very clear about that. That's not going to happen ever. And in fact, the easy governance front end, it's still quite far away because it will be launched alongside the Sagittarius engine, which is going to take a while. But it's going to be very closely regulated. So the way that it's built and hosted technically, it will be very strongly regulated, but also what kind of features and data it offers and how it's designed, it will all be very closely regulated because it's going to be very crucial to the governance dynamics, right? If you consider the easy governance front end being the way that people will delegate their voting power, especially those that are not really interested in the project at all, then the design is going to be really influential, and it has to be very well aligned with Maker Core. So I wouldn't say that's a concern. I'll also start making a bridge to the support scope. I would say that because these ecosystem actors and these sub-DAOs, they'll all be required or expected to offer some things like front-end features for Maker Core, right? There needs to be some alignment with Maker Core. And since all of these teams will be very different in terms of where they are based, what type of work they do, and which jurisdiction they're part of, I would say that could be a really useful way for the support scope to make themselves useful. Because you could consider these entities as being very crucial to the ecosystem. They're like the contributor teams, and they're going to need guidance in terms of how to set up their operations, how to set up their front ends. So I'm not sure where that should go exactly, but it's just that's definitely something that the support scope will touch, I think. You could also consider governance being an important one there. So, for example, Jetstream will be involved in also building front-end stuff for, or basically related to governance, and will need input from people that are experts on the governance operations, right? So, basically, the responsibilities that teams like GovAlpha are currently covering. Yeah, and to be honest, I can't really share anything about the timeline for Endgame. any other questions or comments about maybe the support scope or maybe endgame and decentralization in general?
Dennis, would it be fair to say then that just sequentially, I've been struggling to kind of map out. So maybe here's one particular question. I don't know if this touches on your world, but and I would welcome any comments from the delegates who are here on the call or anyone who's on the call. Certainly, everyone is always welcome to come off the microphone and speak on these calls and give not even only questions, observations, comments. We love for these meetings to become as conversational as possible. So the smart burn engine is kicking off, and the LP stuff. And my understanding is that there's also been code already written and being implemented for the new sub-DAO tokens to participate in that. What I'm curious about though is nothing can really go live until the name is released. Is that a good assumption? So that anything that we might read about with respect to the sub-DAO operations or their tokens, it can't launch before the new brand is announced. And therefore, in my mind, I feel like this is not happening in 2023. If there's any perspective you could give us on how do we think about the things that have placeholder names throughout the atlas, and when these things really are going to even just sequentially come online, even if you kind of can't say like a month, specific month or year.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it's definitely tricky because if you just consider the scope of Endgame, it's kind of ridiculous, right? It's so ginormous, and it covers literally everything from the organization to the protocol to front ends to brand to basically the whole thing. And it's just absolutely massive, and it's all interconnected. So that's also why that kind of explains the current dynamic where the workforce is like very separated from governance in terms of the work being done and transparency, is because this is really a thing that's being built in stealth mode, right? There's a bunch of teams. They're mandated and trusted to participate in this launch, the launch project. But it's all confidential because it just wouldn't make sense to gradually release stuff. It all has to be well coordinated. And in that sense, it definitely feels more like a startup where you just have to be very, very careful about how you do this. I mean, the good thing is that when you're building stuff, you can just build it under placeholder names and in make sure that you're very, let's say, attentive of not leaking any information. So yeah, that's basically the only thing I can say. I will say that the sub-DAOs will launch after the rebrand is launched, right? So it's first a big rebrand and a bunch of things that are related to it, and then sub-DAOs, and then Sagittarius Engine. That's kind of like the sequence of things. But it's important to note that a lot of this stuff is already being worked on in parallel, and it's just there's various teams that need to coordinate and collaborate, because eventually it all needs to it's like one system, right? It's a holistic system. So that's what's currently happening. That's all I can tell you. There's a bunch of teams. There's a big coordination effort to make it happen. And I would say it's going really well. Like I'm really happy to see where we are with this compared to a few months ago. But yeah, it's definitely it's a lot. It's difficult to bring more transparency into what's happening, because it's just also it should be considered as one big thing that needs to be launched.
Well, Dennis, believe it or not, what you just shared is so powerful. I think some people on this call will agree because, I know you've been really busy. And so one of the things that's been happening with governance is, the anonymity and privacy requirement for the delegates. So we believe that the majority of the delegates are, may be very new to Maker. And certainly there's a sense in governance conversations, and I think an anxiety that I'm so appreciative of you coming on this call and that you come on camera, which is really great because the social dynamic has been really difficult, right? With the delegates mostly not wanting to, use voice for obvious reasons. So that would be difficult to manage privacy if people are speaking. And, with everything that you described, which is totally understandable. I mean, people who don't even may not have the history or context with the organization to have that trust. And so you being on this call, for example, showing your face, people are like, okay, there are humans, not everybody quit, and like to just hear that, in fact, because it's actually not even necessarily clear to us which things are in the scopes because they're planned for versus people are actually working on them. Which things should we as governance, whether it's the delegates or the ABC members, should we be like worried about or kind of chasing up on? And what you've described makes the sort of mandate we have been given, which is to focus on the, each of the scopes has their advisory council. So, right, everyone is like this conversation with Dennis really makes that even make more sense, right? Because from our seat, I think that the tip there is that you guys just get the councils organized because everything else is being worked on and there may not be sufficient, kind of ability to talk about it for tons of work product to make sense, right? It might be completely, there may be things that are being developed with respect to other aspects of the scopes that, the danger for I think governance for the conservers here is to get, really into the weeds on some aspect of the atlas that's not well built out. When in fact, what kind of is being built is maybe going in a different direction, and we just aren't completely up to speed necessarily. Like it's impossible to be up to speed real time. And then, as you pointed out, the sensitivity and I think there's language already in the scopes, or I don't know if it was in one of Rune's posts that was very, just honest. Like the launch project is just not going to be following the same level of kind of transparent mandates as the ecosystem as a whole will in the end game, and that we all accept that the pre-game has some very unique requirements. So it's really valuable to have you come in. Well, actually, Caroline is just posting. I was thinking the opposite. Caroline is mentioning for us to continue our dialogue. I was actually thinking the opposite, Caroline, should be that maybe we should have you actually kick it off now, because I think for Dennis to see and hear what you want to share would also be interesting for him. And then, in fact, to have him as part of that discussion in case there are things that kind of come up that the delegates have mentioned that he may have perspective on would be great to do all together. So if you want to, how does that sound, Dennis?
If that's okay, maybe a few more minutes to respond on what you just said, because I think there's so much there, and I would love to respond.
Oh, sure. Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah, so I can imagine that being a delegate or like an AVC member in this stage, it's probably very painful and frustrating because it's just so hard to get things done and there's so many questions probably. I would say that the good thing about where we are right now is that all of the history in terms of maker governance and stuff, it's not that important anymore. Like as a new entrant to the project, it's actually a really good time to step in. because you don't have to deal with this like crazy backlog of context and relationships and and knowledge that you have to catch up with. You can really focus on what's happening right now. And what probably makes it frustrating is that you need to have an understanding of what you can do in terms of building out the scope framework and supporting the scope to support the protocol and the organization. But the problem is that a lot of this stuff is being developed in private, right? In stealth. So there's a lot of questions probably coming from you. My personal take on that is that I believe that this phase for governance participants is to really focus on yourselves first. So try to bootstrap the community and try to find people that you are aligned with on principle level, so to say. And basically use the time to build that out and to also get an understanding of what expertise do I have in my community? What are the things that make us tick, right? And then in a few months, suddenly all of this confidentiality, it's going to be gone, and then there's going to be so much more clarity in which things need to be covered by the scopes. And then it's going to be I think it's going to be very exciting, because then there's just this huge plot of land that needs to be filled, if you know what I mean. There's a lot of things that need to be done. If you then already have some healthy groups or communities that are willing to step in and do that work, and to also coordinate amongst each other to do that work, I think that will be a really good outcome. So just saying that I hear you, and I also feel the social dynamic is a bit weird. I mean, even on the contributor side, builder side, I mean, a lot of people went anonymous. It's definitely weird, but we have to make it work, and I'm sure it's going to be for the right reasons, because even after all of this, like I really strongly believe that Endgame was very necessary, because Maker just was not resilient at all, right? And I feel like the underlying principles of Endgame they have a lot of merit, and I'm glad to see that a lot of contributors that I respected under the core unit model, they're still around, they're still contributing, and they're figuring out the details. I'm also happy to see that there's still some of the delegates, they're still around. Not sure how you all have done that, because it must have been insanely frustrating, especially for the delegates and other governance participants. So big ups if you're still around. But yeah, that's what I wanted to say there. Apart from that, I think it's a great idea, Kianga. So feel free to just conduct the usual agenda, and then if there's anything I can contribute to, then I'll do that.
Thank you, Dennis. That was great to hear. Caroline, do you want to go ahead and kick off your segment then?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it. I just want to say thank you. Thank you to you both. Thank you for this conversation. Your optimism is so refreshing, and to hear how you can articulate the dynamic behind the scenes, because it has been difficult for the aligned delegates. It has been difficult for the AVC members, and I, for one, I think I'm speaking for quite a few people in this room right now, and just saying that it's been really nice to hear your take and your optimism. Bona Publica is saying 100%. Yes. Okay. So with that, let's jump into the housekeeping. Okay. Sharing my screen. Let me know if y'all can see this. Okay, all good? Everyone can see? All right. So first bit of housekeeping, friends. I really appreciate True Name for hopping in on the forum and asking how they can start collaborating with us on the Maker Interactive Ecosystem Map. So essentially, I made a copy of my working draft, and we have purchased a subscription so that even if you do not have an account, you should be able to log on, click on this right here, and we'll give you the slides after the meeting. Click on this little link, and you'll be taken right into Miro. You can leave your notes. You can actually begin editing it. I'm trusting that it won't become a big melee. So feel free to jump in and start leaving post-its and notes and suggestions like that, but maybe refrain from doing ginormous changes unless you're copying a section and then pasting it somewhere else on the board. So really am encouraging experimentation, playfulness, collaboration, because I know that this can be a lot better, and would love to have True Name's help, Navigator's help, the rest of the aligned delegates who are following us. Okay, so ecosystem intelligence reports, I mentioned this earlier. Really excited about this kicking off after seeing the quality of the scope and focus advisories. So just a reminder, submit the link to your Google Doc this Friday in our Discord if you haven't already. Defensor has already done that. Thank you. If you have any questions, just drop it in our Discord channel, let me know. We have already set up a section on our Notion HQ to house the collection of the ecosystem intelligence reports, and we're also setting up a page that will highlight like the most outstanding analyses, because as I mentioned earlier, we do want to call attention to the aligned delegates who are just delivering on all levels. We feel that right now, with the current structure of the atlas and the particular rule elements, if someone decides to follow Refi AVC, it's kind of a crapshoot. They may not have any idea which particular aligned delegate to delegate their voting power to, and we want to make that sort of choice much easier on the folks who are aligned with our values. So we will be able to call out on our Notion HQ through our social media, et cetera, the aligned delegates that are really delivering outstanding value for our community and the voters who trust us. Right, support scope advisories. Again, this is all pulled from our aligned delegates. I thank you for that. I just want to go over some of the main themes. There was quite a bit of overlap. Number one, purpose system. Actually, this was just True Name. True Name called this out. I thought it was a great point. Refi AVC is a natural potential leader when it comes to the purpose system. We should initiate conversations for community engagement and consensus formation. And this way we can help ensure that ecosystem elements, including sub-DAOs, evolve to include the public good in incentive design. This is a really good point, and I appreciate that very much. DAO toolkit. I just talked about this. I left a comment in the chat. What utility? What time frame? How will it facilitate governance participation? These are really excellent questions from Defensor and Libertas. And then finally, another common theme was advisory council and ecosystem actor evaluation. This is seen as really key by our aligned delegates. We need protocols to ensure accountability and manage the risk of the misuse of funds. This is from Bona Publica and Libertas. And finally, from Bona Publica, there is the concern of the sufficiency of the resilience fund, the financial buffer against potential legal and financial risks. Given the current regulatory uncertainty, the protection of the DAO from these external shocks is of paramount importance. Bona Publica then includes a little bit of intelligence here that Voyager creditors received a $5.1 million bill for March through May legal services. So that is a sort of exemplar of why we really need to be considering this. All right, this is from True Name. Thank you, True Name, for going into depth in your advisory regarding milestones and results reporting standardization. And this very much has to do with generally ecosystem advisor and advisory council evaluation and accountability. So True Name describes this as perhaps the most important operational structure at the core of how Maker ecosystem will function, and that a discussion will benefit from early AVC focus. Maker holders, after all, such as ourselves, AVC members, are the only group who can specify what is easy. And then they call out support 5.1.1, where it says it must be as easy as possible for Maker governance to get an overview of the status and the success rate and the probability of success of all ongoing and past projects. So there's a lot smushed in that very simple sentence, very, very complicated topic here. And I think True Name is absolutely on target about that. Finally, True Name points out to previous core unit work that has been done on DAO level objectives and work proposals. Thank you for doing that. I was not aware of this. I have linked it here, my friends. Once you get the slides, I recommend that we all check it out so we can discuss it further. All right, let's talk about GovAlpha and resilience, the departure of GovAlpha. So we had some interesting recommendations here from Sappho. Thank you for this. Proposing that there always is retainers, advisors held in reserve. And the question of, can this be done for all ecosystem actors, including AVCs? Sappho pointed out the disruption to the growth AVC aligned delegates who were suddenly left without an AVC. There was also the question posed by Sappho, how can we incentivize involvement, explore ways to motivate AVC members to stay engaged in the ecosystem? Although I think if you read the forum posts, it was pretty clear that Du was leaving to be involved in another specific way. And then as a result, the remaining AVC member felt that the visionary had left and they would not be able to do that vision justice. So in this particular case, I'm not quite sure that it was lack of incentivization. I think it was other things having to do with the individual's particular likes. And finally, I want to just dig in a little bit to Pros, the resignation of Pros, because I think there are some lessons here for GovAlpha. So in the resignation post that Pros left, there was clearly the issue of burnout, very, very clear. And there was a very interesting reply from Juan from SES Core Unit, where they talked about undercompensation of GovAlpha facilitators. I would love to get some of your takes here, because in the anonymous feedback form that we gave y'all, and thank you for the 4 individuals who filled it out, one of them said without any sort of ambiguity that compensation cannot be an issue. So it's interesting to sort of get like the contrasting takes here. Do y'all agree? Do you agree that undercompensation of GovAlpha facilitators is a big issue? Juan said significantly undercompensated compared to the rest of the DAO. If any aligned delegate out there is inclined to do some quick research to confirm this, a quick comparison between the GovAlpha facilitators and other facilitators, we would be very, very, very grateful. Another user, Khan, jumped in and said governance is an incredibly important part of what makes Maker work. And the work that GovAlpha has been doing has been criminally underrated. The transition to the end game only makes this role more important, and the community should address it with the respect that it deserves. And finally, one says, why do we only have 2 facilitators? This is a disaster waiting to happen. We need more. And what I have noticed, friends, in all the sort of workplaces that I've been in, is that when there's an exodus or when someone leaves, there tends to be like an exodus, you know? So there is this sort of existential risk of having just a handful of facilitators for these core units, because usually when someone of importance, cultural influence leaves, it tends to kick off a domino effect. And so I really do think that I would love for us to talk about these 2 points here. Rune jumps in at one point and says, I hope you'll reconsider becoming a reserve arbitration facilitator. And this speaks to the recommendation of Sappho, that we should always have these reserve facilitators held there in the background. And unfortunately, Pro says, no, I need to take the time for myself, and having billions of dollars of responsibility hanging over my head is not going to cut it. So clearly here, Rune had thought about that, and this person was just so burnt out that they couldn't even consider it. I'm going to call out some really interesting points from Navigator. Thank you, Navigator, as always. Support Advisory Council. Navigator is saying we need to get former and especially recently departed governance practitioners to join. I am wondering if there could be some sort of contractual obligation to join as part of an extended notice. Again, that feels sort of yucky, enforcing that on someone, but usually people care about the Maker protocol already. I'm seeing a great deal of organic care when people are leaving, but maybe just to say, as part of your notice, could you actually give us some time on the Support Advisory Council? Maybe that would be a good idea. Navigator is also recommending that we mobilize current and perhaps people who wish to step into the role of support facilitators, mobilize them now to begin to ideate and develop projects to proactively manage governance risks, including manipulation by grifters and opportunists. And Navigator is pointing out that there is budget and input via these elements. For instance, support 1.1, 3.1. Each quarter, if they deem it necessary, the support facilitators are to solicit proposals and find the advisory council members to perform a project. So clearly there is an umbrella element here that empowers them to do this. I think this is a fantastic idea. And finally, a final point from Navigator is about the GATE, the Governance Artificial Intelligence Tools. Navigator's asking, this all sounds great. The objectives are clearly pointed out, but what time frame are we actually looking at for these tools become practical and effective? And here, Navigator is very aptly suggesting we need input from AI-specific experts. And of course, this is calling out for support advisory council members here in this regard. So excellent points here. Thank you, Navigator. And finally, we get to a non-feedback on GovAlf's departure. And we tried to leave the feedback form quite open-ended. I wanted to point out some of the responses that we got. So I asked, what is prompting the departure? Here are some of the answers that we received. No one likes the endgame vision except people who haven't read it or can line their pockets with it. It's less a vision and more a guide just telling everyone what to do and then changing what that is every month. And here I just want to pause and say, I appreciate this individual for contributing their perspective. And I can understand the frustration. I can sort of hear the frustration. I can understand it. And this is why I'm even more grateful for 0x Denise for coming onto the call today and giving a counter perspective to that, which I think is very, very valuable. Another comment that I'm pointing out, chilling effect from regulatory actions against other DeFi projects and DAOs combined with too much repeated work that blocks you from intellectual work. This makes sense. And here we have a very thoughtful insight. Governance has been neutered to some extent in the endgame. All major proposals come from Rune and edits to the Atlas. This might be a necessary transitional moment before the next era of decentralized governance at Maker can take shape. But in the meantime, it leaves GovAlpha with little to manage, but trying to facilitate the complex but uninspiring minutiae of endgame. Things like bounties, buffers, AD recognition. It's not surprising that they think they could better spend their time elsewhere. Okay, next question that we asked in the form. How to retain high-value contributors. These are some of the insights that you were kind enough to leave us. Project-based work is the future. You will then only be working on something that creates mutual value for you and the DAO. We have to figure out how that would apply to bread and butter work like ongoing governance tasks. It is very possible contributors publicly departing are continuing to work for MakerDAO under another identity. Endgame restructuring is a positive for creating a structure that can better retain actual talent. And here is the point about compensation that I pointed out, and I would love for someone to follow up for us and do this research. This person says it clearly isn't about compensation. I think a genuinely decentralized governance process where good ideas can rise to the top and shape the protocol would be the biggest help. I agree here, and yet I also see the need for a period of time, as 0x Denise pointed out, where things are being developed in stealth, where the scaffolding is being placed up, is being put up, and the community feels quite far apart from that work. But hopefully, like our wonderful guest told us, this period of time will pass, the confidentiality constraints will pass, and then we will get to this place where cooperation and competition allow us to step into a genuinely decentralized process. And finally, how to manage the risk from the loss of longtime contributors. Someone says it's mostly a reaction to people who were told this was a DAO and then got a company. Also, there are government investigations ongoing, and people may be simply getting out ahead of that. The core unit model was broken. Instead, we will have redundancy of teams via competing ecosystem actors that are businesses for DeFi generally, with MakerDAO as one of many clients. Better transparency and accountability around work product, and results will flow to MakerDAO. The independent entrepreneurial model, whether anon or not, should be more satisfying for those involved than being 100% an employee-like situation that pre-existed endgame. Very good point. I would be curious to hear what our guest thinks of that. Do they have any personal experience that they would like to share? Another comment here, it seems overly optimistic to think that an edit to a scope artifact or the like could do anything to replace the massive institutional experience of Gov Alpha. It seems more important to quickly get to a stage where governance is decentralized again and stakeholders want to get involved and stay involved. And then finally, my friends, I asked anything else to see if there was anything else. And here we have a comment. Place a requirement on the core contributors for them to draft standard operational procedures on exactly what they do, how they do it, when they do it. Keep 3 months' salary in a deposit, which will be released once the standard operating procedures are submitted to the DAO. Second insight, longtime contributors who are not aligned should depart. This is a positive. I am not concerned about what has been publicly stated about offboardings. Change is good. And finally, someone, a kind soul, said, ReFi has been a shining light in the AVCs so far. Keep up the fine work. Very happy to be a delegate for you. I cheated here. I just totally did this for selfish reasons because it brought a smile to my heart. So whoever you were, thank you. That is what I have to present, and would love to pause here with 3 minutes left and see if anyone would like to come off mute, or I will also read the chat. Okay, let's see. Denise is responding to a question by Bona Publica regarding sports. As for now, our team is funded until the end of launch project, 1.5 years. And by then, we'll have to figure out what's next. Likely a bunch of paid projects for scope and maybe some for sub-DAOs. Excellent. Libertas says Patrick and Long for Wisdom are giving a few months notice and a few months where they will be available in the event of emergencies. Good framework. Agreed. Very generous of them. Yes. Code Knight says, in my opinion, project-based compensation doesn't function well on the cutting edge. How does one predict the cost for something that hasn't been done before? Abso-friggin-lutely. Great point. OX Denise says, I will add that the sub-DAO ecosystem actor teams will be working exclusive to the sub-DAOs. Kianga says, oh, interesting. So not like how Stakehouse has expanded to work with other protocols. Navigator says, we are struggling to retain core contributors as it is without withholding 3 months of salary. Point. Okay, and then yes, that's what will be a part of the deal. This was fascinating to hear. Thanks for the presentation. Thank you, my friend, for being here. Sappho says, thanks for this. Great first run of incorporating all of the delegate submissions. I agree. This is the promise of collective intelligence, and that's why we are so excited to get your ecosystem intelligence reports. And just, again, very, very excited to have heard from our guests today. Feel like a sort of, the wind is once again beneath my wings. Kianga, my friend, do you want me to pause and stop saying cheesy stuff?
No, I love it. You know, I'm the corniest person in MakerDAO, who's willing to say all the mushy gushy things like how grateful I certainly am for you, and you know, MakerDAOs could not have brought what you were bringing to Maker and to the ReFi AVC, and we're just so appreciative. And I think the structure that you've come up with, hopefully the delegates agree that maybe it'll be a little bit easier to get your bearings on sort of what to do. It's very nice how entrepreneurial and free floating everything is, but a little bit of structure and a little bit of pressure sometimes is great. And so we really appreciate all the effort. And you know, but of course it's all, you know, experimental. Everyone has a different background who's participating as a delegate, no doubt. And so I would just also want to add and relay any fears of anxiety. If you're, you know, no matter what your skill set or background, I think it's wonderful that you've stepped up into the role. And we're certainly understanding that everyone's in a different place. And so the competition will be good to see. But also, you know, just don't be discouraged if it seems like, you know, there are some delegates who are really blazing because maybe they, you know, who knows who they are, but people who've had more experience with MakerDAO are going to have an advantage. And so, you know, we're understanding of that. And we want to hear. We want to feel free to, of course, be very communicative about things that we're asking. Feel free to push back at any time. We're collaborating, and we feel just as much as you're working for us, we're also like working for you. Like you have choices as to which ABCs to follow, and so we're very much wanting to make this rewarding for you, but give you also a sense of confidence that we're going to be around. It's a very tricky set of incentives and dynamics that the delegates are dealing with. I mean, all of us to some extent. This is a leading edge of risk in every way possible. I mean, we have all kinds of risks that each of us individually and with our firms or businesses are accepting as part of this. And so, Caroline and I just want you to know we appreciate that, and we want to be sensitive to that as we're evaluating and going forward. So with that, I will stop talking and say again, Dennis, thank you so much for joining us on kind of short notice when I reached out to you with everything going on, and everyone for participating. That's it for me. Any final words,
friend.
Space?
No, just thank you.